Welcome back to the table. Today I have set up the game Hearts of Iron, coming soon from Steamforged Games, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of this brand new board game. Now, this is based on the PC game series of the same name, Hearts of Iron, which is a World War II simulator. What this game does differently, I think, than a lot of other World War II games is that it has a heavy focus on politics and political maneuvering, as well as just building up your war force and going to battle with other players. They've taken that emphasis and brought it over to this board game as well. So this is not just, Axis and Allies where you're building factories, producing armies, and then battling each other. You are doing that, but there's so much more that's happening on the table and above the table as well, if you recognize that term. This is also not a game of direct conquest. Yes, you can attack each other. Of course, you're taking territories away from each other. You're taking production, destroying factories to limit your opponent's ability to produce. But it is not a game of global domination. You're not trying to eliminate every player. In fact, this is actually a game that uses victory points and has a score track. It plays over a number of rounds. Each one of the rounds is designated with a certain time. And at the end of the game, you're simply looking at the score track to actually see who has the most victory points. Now, you are getting those victory points in a lot of the ways you'd expect, like conquering other players, holding on to their capital cities, and things like that. So to a certain effect, yes, you are still rewarded for conquering other players and taking them out of the game, but that's not the only way you're scoring points. And in fact, there are a lot of ways you can score points, and the game gives you some control over how you're scoring points throughout the game. So that's kind of what I want to focus on when I'm talking about how to set up the game. Now, I have a 3-player game already kind of set up here in front of me, and there is quite a bit going on, but it breaks down, I think, pretty easily. I'll explain each piece as I talk about it, but what I really want to talk about first is the player board. Now, each player board represents one of the different countries that you're going to play as, and each country or faction is represented by some territories that are out on the board that kind of make up that country. You start in control of a certain amount of countries as per your player board, and you'll notice here that the player board has some slots in it. That's because each one of these player boards can be linked to a different ideology. So the United Kingdom has a few different ideologies that they're going to choose from. And those ideologies are chosen through the use of these focus cards. Every faction is going to have a set of these focus cards. You have a few general focus cards that you're always going to use. These represent some of the basic staples of that country and the generals that you can use for that country. You're always going to use that generic set. But then there are going to be more options. For this demo, I have 2 for each different faction. For the UK here, I have the Mediterranean Bastion and Consolidate the British Isles. These are 2 separate decks. They're going to give you some unique focus cards that, of course, focus on the thing. The Mediterranean Bastion focusing on controlling the Mediterranean, for example. And that's the one that I'm going to choose to use today. So you take that focus deck, you get rid of the other focus deck. You're not going to need it at all. This focus deck not only is going to introduce a ton of new cards that get shuffled into your generic cards to make up your new focus deck, it also is going to give you a selection of ideologies to choose from. For example, I can be a democracy or fascism here. I'm going to choose democracy. So I will find the democracy player board, and you'll notice it's also slotted. So it's going to inlay with your faction board, and they're going to connect to create what becomes your player board. So I am the United Kingdom with a democracy. What this is going to do, it's going to give me some abilities. It's also going to give me some ways to score victory points over the course of the game. So a democracy is going to score victory points in a different way than fascism or communism, for example. Also, it gives me this in-game focused card. So the Mediterranean Bastion is going to give me extra points at the end of the game for controlling specific areas. So I'm going to put this out in front of me. So I'm going to know for the rest of the game, this is kind of my goal. And this is public. So you know what the other players are trying to do in order to score points at the end of the game. And you can look at the different ideology boards to learn how they're going to be scoring points during the game. So besides just conquering other players, I can, for example, use civil liberties and spend some manpower just to gain a victory point that way. Now that brings me over to this setup. You've got 4 different resources that you're spending. Well, one of them is your stability. That's going to go up and down as you play the game. You want it to remain high. You're going to get some benefits for having high stability. Then you have political power, production, and manpower. These are 3 things that you're spending to do actions as you play through the game. And there are a variety of action steps you're going to go through. This is not necessarily an action selection game. You're going to go through every step and you're going to get to participate in every step of the game. And in fact, some of these steps can actually be done simultaneously to kind of speed the game up. However, there is a player order. If there's ever a question of two people wanting to do the same thing at the same time, you can reflect back to that. But a lot of the actions you're going to be doing are going to be spending these. You're going to spend political power to interact with the political board, which is what is sitting right over here. This is another core aspect of the game. And you'll notice it kind of starts seated. At the very start of the game, you're going to start with control of one adjacent country, and you're going to start with an allyship with one of the countries on this board. Now, as you're playing the game, as you're doing your political maneuvering, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to ignite war with some of these other countries just by necessity. And that's all tracked with these flags that you see here on the political board. You're going to start in the allyship position with one, which effectively means that you control them. Not really control, but they are working with you. You can place units in their territories. So having an allyship matters, but as you make aggressive movements, that allyship you're going to lose that and eventually get to a spot where you're completely at war with them. Now, you do have to be at war with somebody to take them over. So kind of balancing that. When do I want to be an ally with someone? And then when do I want to move it over to the war? And this actually is the same for other players at the table. You can go to war with other countries, and that's how you're going to take their territories. So it is a multi-step process of political maneuvering. You're going to be spending that political power in order to jostle around that board, make enemies, declare war, and then later on go to battle with them. You've also got production. You'll see that we start the game with these factories out on the board, and we do start with some units out on the board. That again is determined by your starting faction. It's got a specific setup of how this board is set up to start with. But production is how you're going to keep increasing your troops. You're going to be spending your production to put new troops out in your factories. And then lastly, you have manpower. Manpower is used to boost a lot of the actions you're going to do to build factories, and that's kind of a resource you're going to be spending for a lot of different things. A lot of the actions you do in the game can be boosted by spending manpower. Every faction or every country is going to start with a different setup of these stats. They're going to start, of course, with a different focus deck. They're going to start with a different lineup of units. We've all got infantry, tanks, ships, and planes, but they're all a little bit different. You'll notice that there are stat blocks on each one of these units, and that's going to kind of determine how effective they are in combat. You've got what's called a soft attack and a hard attack. You've got their production value, and you've got special abilities. Each one of these units can be upgraded through the use of research cards. There's a research phase in the game where you're going to be able to designate a research card, and yes, you can spend some of your resources to speed up that research. These research cards are going to come into play and increase the value, the ability of your different troops. So as you're playing through the game, you start from one position, but it is going to change, and you're going to focus maybe on a tank game or a plane game based on how you decide to do that research. Again, that's going to kind of a decision that you're going to use in conjunction with those focus cards, because as you draw from this focus deck, remember, it's a unique deck for this particular game. You're going to have some cards in here based on the focus that you chose. So some of these focuses might boost some of the strategies that you're already wanting to use, or they might want you to consider going in a different direction. So the research and focus kind of work together hand in hand to build the strategy that you're using on the board. You can do that political strategy where you're just trying to make allyship with everybody and gain a lot of territories, or you're trying to maybe control them through force and spread your influence out over the course of the board. And again, that strategy is determined not only by the focus that you chose, but also by the ideology you chose, because these are things that are telling you how to score points. So you're going to factor all of these decisions in. So while this game, I think, actually is light on the rules per se, there is a lot that you're actually having to consider when you're making these decisions, because everything is going to matter. Some of those decisions, especially when it comes to that political board, might come back to haunt you if you've declared war against somebody that you really need to be your ally. You're going to have to really work to gain that allyship back. Now, there's a lot that goes into the political maneuvering of this game, and I'll talk about that in a second. But you're going to start the game kind of like what I have set up here. I've got the 3 different countries that I have. I think the final game is going to play up to 5 or maybe even more. Check out the campaign page, and I'm sure it'll tell you how many factions they're going to have in store for the final version. But once the game is set up, you kind of do this pre-war phase, and that's what you see here, where you've put out your factories, you've decided which countries you're going to ally with, and you've put your units out on the board. From that point, once the pre-war phase is done, you move through a certain number of phases. There's the engine phase, action phase, political phase, conflict phase, and then the end phase. You do all of those steps in order, and they're all printed on your player board, so that makes it pretty easy. The engine of the game, so to speak, is driven by these engine cards. Every country is going to have its own set of engine cards that kind of determine what you're going to do or be better at on that turn. Each one of these engine cards is going to have some kind of instant effect that's going to give you some kind of benefit, usually in the form of resources, but not necessarily. And it's going to give you a secondary benefit that's going to increase your ability to do one of these actions. It's going to make you better during production or development, or it's going to make you better during battles. So choosing the engine card, and you're doing this face down, and you're revealing these at the same time. So you don't necessarily know what engine other players are going to be using to kind of control their turn. But this is kind of a critical decision because you're really looking ahead at what do I want to do this turn. You're not going to be able to plan out everything because a lot of what you're doing is going to have to react to the other players' maneuverings on the board and on that political board. And your decisions might be determined based on the engine card that some of your opponents reveal. But you do want to kind of at least think, okay, here's something that I'm going to want to do. I'm going to want to research more or get a new focus card. And that's going to determine the engine card that you play because that is decided before you do any of the steps. And of course, the construction, research, focus, production, deployment, there's a lot of mini steps that happen in there that you do in order. Construction, building factories, research, getting new research cards, focus, getting new focus cards, producing new units, and then ultimately deploying them out on the map. So all of that is kind of done in the action phase. Then you move into the political phase where you're going to be interacting with this political board, spending your political power to make some changes. Now, an interesting thing here is that every one of these allied or neutral countries is going to have their own ideology as well. If your ideology matches, I'm a democracy, I have a better chance of influencing other democracies. They're more receptive to my political influence if we are the same ideology. So looking at your ideology and trying to plan out which countries you're going to ally with, it can be really important. In fact, it can make or break a game because you need to look at what's near you. You need to look at your path. You want to make the path of least resistance to get to where you want to go. And being allies with some of these places means you can deploy units there, you can get closer to the action a lot quicker. That's really important. And then, of course, the conflict phase. And yes, this is a major part of the game because we are still playing a World War II simulator. So all that other stuff aside, we get to the conflict phase, and that's where we're really going to be starting battles. Now, the conflict phase is handled by these little tokens. These are going to be your order tokens, command tokens that you're placing out in all of your different locations. These are going to be placed all at once. So there is a little bit of programming. Think of it like you're sending out your orders and then they're being carried out. Once your orders are there, you're going to flip these over and it could tell you that you're going to be making a move or two moves, or there's even a bluff in here that's not moving at all. Looking around at where the other opponents have placed their order tokens and trying to predict what they're going to do. Maybe they're going to leave something exposed. Maybe they're going to reinforce the country that you are attempting to attack. You'll need to kind of try to guess because once these start coming out, it gets to be pure chaos on the board. You can do your best to predict, but in a high player count game, there's armies moving all over the board. You're going to see some opportunities. You're going to lose some opportunities. All of that is built into the conflict. And of course, you are going to be actually battling. Now, there are two types of battles in this game, but they work pretty much the same as far as you're going to be rolling dice and dealing damage. But you're either going to be fighting other units or you're going to be fighting one of these nations. And if you notice on the board, every nation is going to have some stats printed on that. That first stat is going to be how many units of each player can be in that space. Then you're going to have a spot that says how much is it going to take to do a soft attack or a hard attack. And I talked about the soft attack or the hard attack values on these cards after you fight units. So first of all, you have to fight your way through any units that are in that space, whether you're being attacked or you're attacking. And anytime two countries that are not allied are in the same space, there is going to be a battle there. You have to defeat the units in the battle before you can even attempt to take over the country. After the battle is done, if you still have remaining units, then you need to actually attack the country. And you'll notice that each country is going to have some kind of production. Some of them don't have any, but some of them are going to have production of some of the different resources. The more symbols it has, the more stable that country is considered to be, the harder it is to conquer that. Because after you've battled any units in the region, whatever you have left, you're going to use those units and those units only to attack the country. And again, you're rolling dice looking for hits. But in order to actually take over a country, not only do you have to survive that assault, you have to have at least one unit left. You have to have rolled at least enough hits to cover all of those symbols. So I would at least need 4 hits here to take over Italy if I was still alive. If you lose all your troops, because you can lose troops during that fight, if you lose all your troops, you've got nothing left, you don't get to conquer it at all. So you really need to think hard about when to press, where to press, and how many units to bring into every battle, because that's going to be all done, like I said, during the conflict phase. Everything moves, and then you get to evaluate the battles and carry out any battles that you can. Then you go into the end phase. You're going to be drawing event cards in this game. These event cards are going to affect everybody equally. Every end phase, you're going to draw an event and apply its effects. You're going to generate your income and resources. You're going to check your stability to make sure that you are still stable. Each stability level is going to increase or decrease some of your resources. So if you drop too far in stability, you need to be really careful because you're going to be losing resources then. And then you check your victory points. And again, that's the goal. That's the goal of everything you're doing in this game. Every move you make, every action you take should be to fulfill some of the victory point requirements. You're always trying to move towards your in-game goal, but these points don't score to the end of the game. So you really don't need to worry about if you complete your objective on round 1 and say, hey, I just took control of all these countries. Great. You have to hold them for the whole game to score these points. So you really want to focus on the short-term points that you're going to gain from your board, and also just the generic points that you can accrue. Taking over an enemy's capital, for example, and holding it is going to generate you points. So all of those points are being tallied up at the end of the round. So taking something early that fulfills your goal doesn't necessarily mean that you're still going to score those points. You need to still be controlling it by the end of the round if it's a control goal. Some of these goals just involve you spending points or spending resources or doing specific actions during the course of that round, and those are going to score. And you'll see the round tracker can move through 6 spots. At the end of the game, there's one last amnesty phase. This is where you're going to look at all of the in-game scoring. So you are still going to do the end of the round scoring in the last round, and then everyone is going to check their focus cards or any other cards they have that are going to generate for them in-game scoring. Once you tally that up, that's the end of the game, and the player with the most victory points is declared the winner of World War II. So if you can't tell just from me giving you this overview, there is a lot more going on. But since you do have just a series of phases, the phases themselves are made pretty easy to understand. The way that the engine cards and the focus cards are designed are pretty easy to understand. The real brain-burning aspect of this game is all of the political maneuvering and the physical maneuvering of this board. So as you can tell from this overview, this is a lot more than just a troops on the map battle game. You really are trying to bring all these disparate things together, and you really are benefiting from having a strategy that you can carry out through the course of the game. But of course, you're going to be making tactical decisions every single round because it's not going to be so clear-cut how you're going to get your points because other players know. And of course, the more that you play this game, the more you can see the strategies that other factions are using, the more you can try to use your political maneuvering and physical maneuvering out on the board to thwart your enemies as much as you are trying to get victory points yourself. So this is a great game, obviously, for Hearts of Iron fans or anyone that's a big fan of World War II. If you like what you're seeing in this video, you like what I'm describing here, take a look at the campaign page to see all that you're getting in the game. And please leave some comments down below, jump into our Discord, let me know if this game is hitting all the right buttons for you. I'd especially love to hear from some of the history fans, World War II gamers out there, if this is a game you're looking forward to. So thank you so much for watching, and until we see you again, make sure everyone has fun at the table.